Hello, Grumsworth.
Hello, Burlokk.
And hello to all you lovely folk, to the Preambull, your every so often digest of all things hobby.
That's right. This day we'll be bringing you a look at some of our favourite games, a couple of them in fact. A breakdown of a wondrous card from Magic the Gathering, the land of Innistrad, the horror plane of Magic, and we'll take a wander through associated avenues. Hobby ones. What have you been up to this week, Burlokk? What have you been doing hobby-wise?
This week, it's been quite exciting for me this week, hobby-wise. It's been quite busy. Yes, I've had a bit of a busy one. I've managed to get out some old Magic the Gathering decks. When I play Magic, I've got a few different formats that I like to play. For anyone unfamiliar with Magic the Gathering, there are different ways you can play said game. You can either play it in the format of Standard, which is the most recent Magic cards that have been released. You can also play Modern or Legacy, which are using older cards, much older cards from throughout Magic's history. Legacy being the older of the two, which goes right back to the beginning, or even Vintage.
That's right.
But there is one format which is probably the most popular now amongst Magic the Gathering players, and that is called Commander. I don't know if you've ever played Commander, Grumsworth.
I've not myself, no. Enlighten us.
Well, Commander is it's a multiplayer way of playing Magic the Gathering, so it's a bit more social than it is anyway.
Okay.
The idea being that you have ideally 4 players, but you can have 3 to 6, makes for a good sized gaming pod of players. And you have it's called singleton decks, so you're of individual cards as opposed to play sets of 4. Under normal circumstances, you can only ever have 4 of any one card in your deck. With Commander, you can have just a single one of each card. And as the name suggests, your deck is themed or tied to a Commander card, a legendary creature or a legendary entity from within the card pool of Magic the Gathering.
Very good, which is vast, isn't it? So
hugely
choose
vast.
from there.
Yeah, and certain cards work much better in certain formats. So something like certain cards in Commander which affect all opponents. When you're playing in a 1 versus 1, those cards aren't quite as powerful as in something like Commander, which would affect each player around the table. And if you've got 6 people on the table, your card's getting a lot more value. It allows you to play around with certain cards in your collection that you might not necessarily play with. Your Commander is a particular color: blue and green, red, white, whatever. And your deck is limited to that Commander's color. So if you have a red Commander and he's only red in its mana cost, you can have only have red cards in your deck.
Very good.
So it gives you a little bit of a theme to work with, as I like doing with a lot of my gaming, creating a little bit of a story and giving it a little bit of a background, thinking about it in a more sort of imaginative way.
Yeah, that's nice to add that sort of narrative twist, isn't it? We've spoken before about the all red full-on goblin deck.
That's right. Yeah, we've had some attempts at Magic over the past few weeks, and it's been great fun. And we've played some one-on-ones, but this time we played some Commander, and it was really, really good. One of the guys at the table had never played Commander before. It was somewhat new to Magic anyway, so that was quite nice to show him a new format as well. But the other guys who were just itching to play some multiplayer, we all did really well. Some great plays, good highlights, that I can think back to.
Good highlights. Throw us out one.
Oh,
if you can get a nice short one in.
Maybe it was to do with the pouncing shore shark.
Well, I was just thinking, did that see an appearance, I wonder?
It did. In my deck, I used it because I thought,
wow.
Well,
okay.
I did promise old Hector 52 from a previous episode, who chose the pouncing shore shark as our spotlight card.
He did.
I did promise that if I got a chance to use a pouncing shore shark, I would. He saw some play. That was highlight enough for me.
Brilliant. I mean, Hector 52 will be overjoyed, and I'm assuming the pouncing shore shark carried you to utter victory, I would imagine.
Well, second place. That's good enough for me.
Second place with a shark. What could be better?
Exactly right. Yeah. But aside from Magic the Gathering, I mentioned last week how I was helping a pal with some Eldar.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so he popped around for round 2 of painting, and where he's got a certain few squads in his small army that he's got at the moment, and we decided to divvy that out to certain sessions. So we do one squad in one session, another squad in another session,
Very
and so
sensible,
and
very
so on.
wise.
Yes, exactly. Well, the first session we had quite an in-depth discussion. We've talked at length before, actually, now about how important it is to plan your work when it comes to your hobby, especially with your painting and your construction.
I think we were right.
Yeah, so we took the opportunity at the very beginning to talk at length about how we are going to approach the painting situation, what colors we're going to use. So we're not going to be bogged down with racks and racks of paint set out in front of us to confuse things and muddle the mixture. So we got our colors set out, and so half of the first session that we took was a discussion and a planning phase, really, which really helped,
Okay.
because come the second session, which we actually had slightly less time for, it allowed us to finish a squad of I think only 6 dire Avengers, but we finished them, and they look lovely. And we can actually get some pictures up. Apologies to those on audio only,
Of
but
course, of
rest,
course.
rest assured they are lovely. And if you're following us on our Instagram or any of our social medias, there'll be pictures on there as well, so you can easily check out some of our results from our work.
It's good to check over the results from your
It is,
work,
yeah.
certainly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just to see if our theories hold any water at the very least.
That's right. And do they?
Yes,
Do
they
they?
do. Yeah, they came out nice. The idea of taking that step away from doing some real hardcore, very intense painting where everything has to be right and there's loads of different techniques thrown in, loads of different materials you're using. It's nice to just do something at a very stripped back, very basic, very simple kind of level. It's not taken away
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
effort that my friend is putting into learning this stuff. You have to start with the basic things, I think, and going back to that just for a few hours is really, really nice. We get some results instantly out of it, and it happens quickly. It's given me actually a little bit of inspiration for my next painting project, whatever it may be, just to perhaps go for that real basic approach at first. As long as the colors are kept neat, the paintwork's kept crisp, and I don't overthink it too much, I think it might give me some results for some of my own work as well. So
I love that idea of helping someone out like that as well.
mm.
As we discussed in the last episode of the preamble there, when you've got someone who is less keen to do the paintwork, if you yourself have, thrown billions of hours into the pit of becoming half tidy at painting, it's nice to be able to share some of that knowledge
It
and,
is.
dare I say, wisdom. I don't. It's not wisdom.
You said it.
Damn it. Yeah, just to sort of say, look, we could do it this way and we could do it this way, and then to
Yeah.
see quick, like crisp, decent looking results. It is really heartening, and I think it's nice for those of us who maybe spend a little too long sometimes on individual miniatures, agonizing over color schemes,
Yeah.
shading styles, all of
Yeah.
the above.
Yeah.
It's nice just to go and paint a model in a very straightforward fashion.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And agonizing is right. At times, there has been some very agonizing moments in my
Yeah.
painting career. But what about yourself there, Grumsworth? Tell us a little bit about how you are and what you've been up to on your hobby radar. What's been your salve?
Well, to be honest, you talk about agonising. We'll stick purely to the hobby portion of my life this week. It's been fairly small, I would say,
Okay.
but effective, right? So some time ago, my dear brother there printed me off a lovely scale replica of the pipe pistol from the Fallout series. Yeah.
Okay.
For those of you that are familiar with it, it's a kind of a homemade weapon, the sort of thing that you might cobble together from bits and pieces lying about your home after years of nuclear war.
Well, let's hope we never get to that eventuality.
Well, if we do, I'm prepared with something that looks like that, right? So 3D printed this thing out in a resin type material. Nice quality to it, looks very, very accurate, looks like the in-game piece itself. I believe that the file used in its creation was ripped directly from the game files.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
Yeah, so
interesting.
it is scaled right. It looks the part. It's beautiful.
Mm.
So I got hold of this some time back. See our previous podcast for scraping mold lines and sanding and pinning and all that sort of good stuff.
Please
Because
do.
that, please do, yeah, that all went into the construction of this piece.
Mm.
And then I was presented with this beautiful, pure white version of this in-game item. So a little while back, I set to working on it, gave it a nice primer. Actually, it went together as a sub-assembly.
Mm.
So I kept the barrel itself separate from the main body of the weapon, which is represented in a kind of an ABS type stock handmade. You've got the rear end of the weapon. I'll throw up some pictures now so you can have a little peek of it. This is it all complete, because this is the small amount of hobby this week was to finish the barrel of this weapon, which almost rounds it out.
There's an element of realism to this, actually. I really quite like it. It does look genuine, like it's has been ripped from the game, because it genuinely has. You know, its scale and everything looks just right.
A really junky looking thing. I thought that'd be nice to hang on a wall, to hang off a belt, you know, just to mince around with, which is what I intend to do with it.
Very good.
But yeah, this week I finished out the barrel. So bear in mind, this thing started pure white kind of resin substance. The barrel was actually in two halves, which was a massive pain. So they were aligned, they were filed, sanded down, and then using some mighty stuff, the old Gorilla Glue, put those two pieces together. Then it was the case that I thought, okay, so I kind of want this to be the brightest piece of the weapon. I was kind of thinking of like an old radiator pipe, something like this, some discolored white.
Yeah. So you're thinking as a scavenger almost, aren't you? When you're putting it together in your mind and when you're painting it, you're thinking as a scavenger would.
Not just when I'm putting it together and painting it. I'm thinking like that in my everyday life. I'm thinking as a scavenger would, yeah. So I thought I want this to be kind of chipped and to look like it's been used. So what I did is I whacked over a nice cheap £1 can of silver. Like I drowned this thing in it, making it a little bit smoother, really hard coat of silver.
Yeah.
I then used the kind of chipping technique to achieve the look on this weapon.
Do you mean by chipping technique, sort of the hairspray came out? Or is it a different chipping technique you're talking about?
Nope, you know it. It's the exact hairspray one. So a further £1 was spent on a can of hairspray. So it was then given a nice thick coat of hairspray. I then went in with the airbrush with some off-white. I used various kind of browns and blacks just to give it a bit of dirt. Some of this was taken straight out of a pot and rubbed onto the barrel of this weapon using an old rag. Some of it was airbrushed on just to create a sort of a difference in the filth and the wear and tear.
Yeah.
And then we come to the really fun part of the chipping technique. Essentially what happens there is the hairspray sits under your top coat of paint, keeping it from mixing with your undercoat, which in this case was the £1 can of silver.
Yeah.
So I got my humble toothbrush out, the one I use for my teeth, right. And then what you do is you add a little water to your toothbrush there, or other brushing implement, right? And then you just start to scrub at this thing. Yep. And it takes off the paint and the hairspray, but it leaves a very, very realistic kind of natural wear and tear of chipping. I chose a few spots to work a little bit harder on, so I scrubbed a little bit more off. I just dragged the brush quite lightly in some places, just to take the very top layer of paint and hairspray off, till it was at the point where I was happy with it there. It looked decent. I got a rattle can of some unknown black paint. It was probably Chaos Black. Gave the end of the barrel just a quick blast, just to give it a sort of a little bit of a homemade black powder explosion. And then I sealed it all with a drop of the old Testor's dull coat, which locks in. Excellent, yeah, which locks in all of the really light paintwork from the airbrush. Any hairspray that's trapped under there is transparent. it's locked in under
Gets
that
locked
coat.
in. A very important step, actually.
Very.
That final varnish, because not only does it very slightly adjusts the overall shade and color of your
It
final piece,
does, yeah.
but also it gives that it gives the thing a completion,
Sort
doesn't
of
it?
uniformity, doesn't it, actually?
Yeah, and I find that when you finally put that last coat on and you see it drying gently in the air, and you see it coming
Mm.
together as a final piece,
Oh.
and yeah, and it shows on this because this looks wonderful. Great job.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. So once that was done, the pipe just like locked into place. It's dry fit at the moment because I intend to do some shenanigans with the bolt action
Ah,
piece there.
hmm.
It's going to have a working kind of bolt on it as well,
Very
but that's
nice.
for another day. I'm not going to go waving it around on the street. I
Okay,
might do at night.
perfect. So listen, we're going to talk about a particular meandering subject, and we was thinking about going along the routes of our favorite games, specifically tabletop, from a particular moment in time, from a snapshot in time. Because if you're anything like
That's
me,
right.
your favorite game, it sort of flip flops a little bit from time to time. You'll go into this game for a while, then maybe you'll go and do something else, maybe after 6 or 7 months of doing that game, and
Hmm.
it might go back and forward. But there are certainly some games that I've played over the years that have stood out slightly more than others. I was thinking about talking about More Time.
Oh, were you now?
More Time, yes, it is an excellent game, and it's still very dear to me. More Time, for those of you who have never played it, or you may well have heard of it, it was a game that came out around about 1999,
Hmm.
and it was it was released after Warhammer Skirmish, which was written in the back of the sixth edition Warhammer rulebook, if I remember rightly. It shared
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it shared an awful lot of the rule set from Warhammer Skirmish,
Mm.
and it added to it in a few ways. Um, and as the name Warhammer Skirmish suggests, it's about small groups of warriors, small battalions of soldiers. So you don't need to paint many figures. So that's one thing.
Brilliant.
Um,
That's an incredible start. I like it already.
so this was released around 1999, and it was actually around the time it was released when it was as it was on the shelves of the hobby stores and the games workshops about the land that I became
Beautiful.
aware of More Time.
Very
Um,
good too.
so it was about 1999, 2000 I discovered it, and I was I remember going into my local hobby store and seeing it on the shelf, thinking this looks incredible. I saw the rule book, which had a wonderful piece of artwork on it. It had the More
Yeah.
Time name. More Time. There was the crow.
I remember it now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it was so dark and black. And the moment that I opened those pages up, I was just artwork thrown at me. All pictures of
Oh.
these mutated little creatures and human men with bird masks coming out of their heads. And
Mm.
it was all real kind of gruesome and grotesque, and almost carnival-like in a way.
That's
And
exactly what I was going to suggest,
mm,
actually. There was quite a carnival vibe about the whole thing. I seem to remember some of the artwork featuring um, sort of dancing apple cores,
that's it.
fish,
Yeah.
frogs,
Yeah.
all in sort of a ghastly, weird, grim, slightly comedy parade.
A lot of the work was done by Blanche, of course, John Blanche. So, but he was obviously responsible for lots of the artwork inside that book,
Yeah.
which will stay with me forever. But I think one of the main things about the game that sort of kept me hooked, aside from the artwork inside, obviously, was the fact that it had this skirmish experience to the actual playing of the game. So you didn't need to paint many models, as I've said, which was something that I was already coming to terms with being an issue for me, even
Yeah,
those early days. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
so having fewer miniatures to paint obviously is something that was great. And I was already playing Necromunda a lot, so I was seeing some
Mhm.
similarities there. Necromunda, More Time, other games like Blood Bowl, Battlefleet Gothic, etc., are all part of the Games Workshop specialist games range. And
Yeah.
More Time, as I was reading through the book there, um, was set in a city in the Empire in the Warhammer Old World. You take the Warhammer world as it was and its current time frame. This was set sort of 500 years before the current events of the
Okay.
Warhammer
Yeah.
world. So it was like a piece of history from the Warhammer Old World being told
Nice.
from
Yeah.
old storytellers, and a lot of the small little snippets of story and little bits of flavor they added into these books really helped to capture that. It was like the old man telling a tale, gather round.
The old man telling the
Telling
tale.
the tale, yeah. Don't go to Mordheim, he'd say.
He
Oh, why
would
not?
say that. He would say that. Yeah, yeah.
But the premise for Mordheim was quite an interesting one. The idea was that this
Hmm.
city was hit by a huge comet made of warpstone, which is this sort of magically imbued stone or rock that has
Hmm.
the ability to mutate and change things in a very unnatural kind of way, very chaotic kind of way. But of
Hmm.
course, with it comes the riches and the looting that a city beset by this huge comet strike, most of it being destroyed in the process, lots of ruined buildings, and lots of good modeling opportunities for making some very good scenery.
Yeah.
And you'd build a warband around this. And the idea is you'd go into Mordheim, collect up all the warpstone shards that you could find, leave Mordheim with as much as you could carry, and sell it on to the traders and the merchants outside the city in an
Hmm.
attempt to gain experience for your warband and earn a little bit of gold so they can eventually retire as happy adventurers. That's the
Hmm.
premise of the game, really, is that you build this warband up, you fight some battles against other warbands that are entering the city to fight for the same thing. You'd fight over the spoils.
Quite a unique setting, even for
Very.
a for a Warhammer product, wasn't it?
Mm,
It was set in a very almost self-contained little area of the old world there. But I seem to remember the range of miniatures for it
mm.
being fairly unique also.
Yeah, they were. They absolutely were. You had some lovely multi-part Skaven and Empire miniatures
That's right.
in the starter box with some quite, for the time, some quite nice scenery. Actually, they were
Hmm.
cardboard terrain. But when it went together, it looked very evocative of a ruined city, smashed apart by a huge comet strike and looted and pillaged and burnt down by the raiding war parties fighting over the spoils. But what they put into this box set at the beginning wasn't the push fit, wasn't the standard starter style
Oh
miniatures.
no.
So these were real sort of multi-part kits which you could change around a little bit, do lots of easy weapon swaps, strap loads of bags and pouches and things onto them. But that was okay for these kind of models for me because I'm only
Hmm.
building a handful of them, a dozen or so of these models. So I can really take my time on each one, give each guy a name, and that was encouraged because your
It
warband had
was, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it had a roster, and you would name your leader, and you would name the little young bloods that would fight alongside him, learning the ropes, and you'd then
Hmm.
name all of the fighters that made up the rest of the warband. And you'd gather up equipment and experience and learn new skills. So there was a longevity, there was a campaign style.
Very campaigny. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
And that the game was written by, well, firstly by Alessio Cavatore, who was responsible for the 6th edition
Strong.
Warhammer. And 6th edition Warhammer, well, it was hailed as the best version of Warhammer to have been written. And to this day, people still play tournaments of 6th edition
Yeah, I can well
Warhammer.
imagine. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
But also, I think Thomas Prinnan and Rick Priestley wrote it as
Okay.
well. So it had
The old guard.
a very strong coterie of game designers, which was really nice to see, actually.
I probably only played a fistful of games.
Yeah.
I was very into converting the war bands themselves. I had a Skaven, um, the Possessed, Cult of the Possessed, I
Oh,
believe
yeah.
they were.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
as
Yep.
well. Both very solid looking, superb models. I'm completely in love with Skaven anyway at the time. And the whole thing centered around Warpstone, which is kind of holy stuff for
It is.
your little rat man, the Skaven. I enjoyed my experience playing it, but more actually putting together and kind of theming out the war bands that I did.
Yeah, yeah,
But
that's
that
right.
was it was really, I suppose, I played only a few games of it because I didn't really have the group that were interested in playing it. So I assume you yourself, you must have had like a little bit of a gang there interested in playing more time.
I was playing a lot at my local GW and at my local game store as well. So
Lovely,
I
yeah.
had sort of two avenues to which to explore my tabletop gaming. At the local game store, you had a lot more sort of house rules thrown in.
Mhm.
You had a lot more sort of, it was sort of what I like to call the term kitchen table wargaming. You know, it's
Yes,
where you're really just
very, yeah, yeah,
having a bit of a laugh. It's really casual.
yeah.
Um, whereas at Games Workshop, I found that it was a slightly different gaming experience, but in a different way, not any worse or any better. It was a
Just
little bit
different.
more,
Yeah.
it was just different. Yeah, it was a little bit more by the book. You always had the Games Workshop staff member on hand who, well, just so happened he wasn't particularly familiar with a lot of the rules, and a lot of the guys
Good, good.
used to go to used to go to one of the regulars who was very, very good at this sort of thing. But that's by the by. So we used to go and argue over, what I know that I'm pretty sure this weapon gives you that much strength bonus, not this one. It's
Okay.
oh no,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah.
that's the other weapon. That's the spear that gives you that. You're talking about the two-handed axe.
A halberd.
Okay,
Yeah.
two slightly different communities, I guess.
But you were able to dip into both of them.
Yeah, and both areas were playing lots of more time when it was released.
Very good.
And I remember on a couple of occasions going down there for a whole day, 8-9 hours at a
Oh,
time.
lovely.
But not even just to play. This is to say, well, we need some more scenery built because we haven't got enough for all the people that want to play this game. So we've got to make
Okay.
some. So let's all just club together. Let's just go out to a hardware store nearby, grab a load of foam card or a load of it like thin MDF, and just build a load of scenery for a day. And we did that on numerous occasions. It was really good. Really gave you that sort of communal spirit, community spirit that you want to have from a gaming group. Who everybody puts in their own share of ideas, and within a week we'd have 3, 4, or 5 different 4x4 tables chock full of scenery. And that was another thing about these kind of games. When you're playing the larger war games where you have ranked units of soldiers, you need a little bit of flat space to be able to maneuver a lot of the models and units around the table. Whereas with something like Wartime, again with Necromunda and some more of the skirmish-based war games, you can afford to have loads and loads of scenery with which you can move in, round, and it blocks line of sight at different times and everything. So I think really the whole ethos of Mordheim at that time really scratched so many itches for me. And so I had loads of different guys I knew that played it. I played it a lot at home as well, with friends who'd pop over. I think one thing with gaming groups and going to the same place, you end up fighting over the same table with the same scenery, with the same players. And you know exactly what's in that guy's warband. You know exactly what to avoid. You know how to beat him. You can work it out after a while. So I find that I had enough variation to draw on loads of really good ideas and have enough variety with which to make each game that much different from the last and that much more exciting. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So it sounds like you played an awful lot of Mordheim there.
Yeah.
How long did this period of playing last?
Well, actually, it was probably the longest period of time that I've done any kind of wargaming of one single system. I think we played it solidly for about 3 years. Yeah, which sounds crazy when you think that a lot of the games of Mordheim that you play, well, they can be quite short. They can be up to about 25, 30 minutes, 45 minutes at most, because you've only got a few miniatures on the board. But it was the between game experience that was good, because as your warband gets experience by fighting each game, whether they survive, how many of the opponent's warband they manage to take out. So individual characters within your warband could gain more experience than others. And as a result, they gain extra skills. So there was a longevity to the game that lasted outside of that moment on the tabletop.
I see.
And it carried on. And you had your roster sheet, a physical bit of paper, where you had all the accrued experience of each of your members of your warband. And you got to know these characters a little bit. So it was like you were telling a story.
Very narrative. Yeah,
it is very narrative. And I think we've mentioned it before about that being my kind of favorite way to play games. This was perfect for that, because it allowed me to give each of these guys a little backstory. I wrote loads of my own little bits of fan fiction, but it really helped me immerse myself in the world. I mean, I was already playing a lot of Warhammer anyway, so I was quite familiar with it, but learning a lot about this new city of Mordheim. And then in later versions of Warhammer, that same lore carried over, and it became then weaved in to the main overall narrative.
Of course. Yeah. That's kind of the ultimate accolade, isn't it? For a mini game compared to the monster that was Warhammer back in the day. For it to have enough impact and enough players and enough everything put into it for it to make a mark to the point where Mordheim is referenced in later versions of the army books for the Warhammer system.
And even to this day, it's a very evocative, very exciting game for me to think about picking up a game and playing. If you were to ask me tomorrow, do you fancy a game of more time? I'd jump at the chance. Whereas if you were to say to me, do you want to play a game of 3rd edition Warhammer? I'd be like, oh, I don't think I've got time for that.
Maybe not. Time and space and
Time and
whatnot.
space, yeah. And you can afford to play more time or these smaller skirmish games on much smaller boards as well. You don't need the whole 4x4 or the 6x4. You can literally rock up on anybody's kitchen table or on a little 2x2 board, even just a small little square. Throw some buildings on it and have a little bit of a game. So it had that quick fire version of playing at games like that. It also had that longer campaign style games where you could have, like you do with Dungeons and Dragons, you could have potentially a games master that writes the narrative for this game, tells you the story of where your warbands are going as they work from one side of the city of Mordheim perhaps to the other, weaving your games together, allowed for having more than 2, 3, 4, 5 people involved because they've each got their own warband and they can each contribute to the story of this campaign that you might be writing for something like Mordheim. So it's really sort of a diverse game that allowed for lots of different options, both for homebrew rules, using quite competitive lists, working out the really good characters you want to have or that particular skill you want to aim for. So to summarize, it was an all-encompassing good time during that time. Yeah.
Bloody grand.
It was really exciting. Yeah. Sorry to ramble on too much about it, but it was a favorite game of mine after all.
Exactly. And I think all of us can just at any given moment almost burst into song about our favorite game, can't we? Or one of our favorites.
I was about to, but I won't. Save your ears.
Maybe we'll have that we'll lock that behind some sort of paywall.
Oh yeah. The only time we'll ever touch a paywall, for our songs and singing.
It will be for song and dance, I think.
The bardic arts of Grumsworth and Burlokk.
Exactly. Best write that down, actually.
Not a new segment, surely.
We're always birthing new segments here.
So hats off to good old Priestley, Cavatore and Prinan, who done an excellent bit of work in Mordheim, and it will stay with me to the end of my days. A game like that. So
I love that.
Grumsworth, you must have a favourite game. Something that you can also wax lyrical about.
Well, like us all, when you've been at this sort of hobby situation for as long as I have, and for as long as Burlokk has as well, you will definitely be weighed down with choices as to your favourite. So I'm going to say this is one of my favourite games. A little bit like yourself, it was because it was played really intensively over about 1.5 years for me. Unlike you, I probably wouldn't just pick this game up and play it again because the system as it currently stands has changed reasonably radically.
I see.
The heart and soul of the game is still intact, but it has changed. It's moved away from the game that I know and loved and played hundreds of hours worth, probably. It's got to the point where it's stagnated.
I see.
I don't know many people who still play it. I don't see much in the way of new releases and this sort of thing for it. There was some shenanigans with the company, essentially. Right. Those sort of things are for another episode. I'm going to tell you about the heyday, for me, certainly, and I think for the majority of players that played this game. The game in question is by Hawk Games, as they were known then. They were actually bought out by a company called TT Combat, who actually make another one of my favourite games, but that definitely is for a different episode. Yeah. So we're going to talk about Hawk Games and their flagship game, which was Drop Zone Commander. It was kind of like a 1.5 years sort of hobby experience. It started to consume almost all of my hobby time. I don't really think I played much else after getting into the system and the lore and the miniatures, which are all super original, I think anyway. It became really consuming. So I first came across this at a yearly convention held in the city of London over here. Salute.
Salutes. Oh, what a convention that is as well.
It's a belter, very
Yeah,
strong.
very good. Yeah, yeah.
Would highly recommend you all, if you get the chance to take a wander down there. It normally seems to come around sort of early Mayish, isn't it? Somewhere around
Yeah.
that, end of April. So it was at Salute. I think it was a little while back, 2016. I was playing a few bits and pieces, some kind of low level, mostly homebrew sort of skirmish games, because like yourself there, Burlokk, time has slowly pushed me away from massive scale. You know, I still like the idea of playing a 4 or 5 hour game over a huge, great table, the prep and the effort and everything that goes into that. So I was playing a lot of kind of skirmishy, some sort of homebrew sort of games that required sort of 10 or less miniatures, small kitchen table boards, like you say, you know, the likes of Wartime and Necromunda, Malifaux and Infinity, games like this. So I was wandering around kind of almost aimlessly, just enjoying the spectacle of Salud there, you know, having a look at some interesting miniatures, loads of good gaming tables. There were pickup games aplenty, people sort of play testing their new systems, trying to get you engaged with it. And one of these I walked by had a really beautifully set up little stall. I had some really nice little well lit but quite small shelving units there, with miniatures that at a distance you couldn't really tell what they were. I looked at this, I saw the name Hawk Wargames, superb little logo, 2 or 3 bods behind the counter there, and out in front they had loads of tables set up, but they were quite small tables, and they had some terrain and mats on them, which for me, I looked at them, very reminiscent of the GW's Epic game system.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Where
Fond memories of that one as well. Very fond memories of that one.
Absolutely, yeah. Where, in short, the sort of Epic game system allowed you to field humongous great armies, but on a very small scale. You know, absolutely. Your Space Marine or your Orc was about 5 mil high, wasn't he?
Very,
Something
very
like
small.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
So looking at these boards that were set up by the Hawk War games there, they reminded me of that. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I've not seen anything like that for some time, right? So I take a wander over, and the miniatures for this game are stunning. They're actually in 10 mil, very unique looking. They were not sort of, there's some tropiness about it. There's a kind of a straightforward human faction, a very outlandish, unknowable alien faction,
Yeah.
and another outlandish but more knowable alien faction, and a couple more human ones, right? But they were all super unique looking.
Right, right.
And I remember looking at these miniatures and thinking, even if I never play this game, I'd like to paint some of these guys. These look really, really cool. And then I stood for a little while and watched some people playing this game. And it's like, wow, this looks really unique. So one of the things that I found really drew me in on that day as well, because it was actually me and my dear brother, we purchased the starter set together and shared out the opposing forces.
Share the load.
Share the load. That's right. That's what we did there. Yeah. Interestingly, later on, we swapped the load, which is a less commonly used phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work as well, but
it's used in some circles, right? What we're looking at here is we're looking at armies that are scaled in 10 mil. Right, the miniatures, for the most part, were resin, but they were really crisp, lovely, deep detail lines in, very, very crisp. Where it needed to look organic, it looked super organic.
Anyway, what sort of year was this thing developed?
So I think it was first released in 2012. Yeah, I had not really heard or seen anything of this game until this 2016. It ambled along under the radar, maybe. I know that Hawk Wargames, because I met them that day selling their product, were a super small studio, like 3 or 4 guys, and the guy who wrote the rule system also painted the majority of the miniatures in the core rule book.
Wow.
He kind of he did the art direction. He did almost everything. It really was his baby.
It's actually quite nice to hear that this was one guy's efforts.
Yeah, pretty much. Dave Lewis,
Dave Lewis.
lovely man. You did a good job, Dave. I've already given nods to him, but a couple of
Dave.
nods there. Extra ones for Dave. Yeah, superb. And we met him on the day and we had a little chat with him, and he was
Very
really
nice.
enthusiastic about the product, his project, really. So I was drawn in by the really unique look of the miniatures. The scale was very interesting because I hadn't painted anything so small miniature wise for some time. So I looked at it and I thought, hang on a second, these armies, although they're representing very large, medium to large forces, that there's probably only actually quite a small amount of resin and plastic here to paint. So in my mind, I equated it to like, this is a skirmish game, because I can probably paint all these tiny little units as quickly as I can do 10 guys. Played on a smallish table, although you can use larger ones, but the playtests were being used on these tiny little, I don't know, they're almost like a 3x3 table.
Right.
And they were just little intro games and stuff like this, but I watched people playing them. I thought, this is a project I can get on board with paintwork wise as well. It's not going to kill me. Let's have a little chat with the guys behind the stand and see what this is all about. They were really happy, as we all are, to ramble on about their project here.
Yeah.
And so they gave like a little brief kind of summary of the lore behind the game, which is actually really dense. Yeah, picking up the core rule book was like picking up a 90s version of any of your Warhammer type games. It was probably about 50% fluff, just narrative, like detail
Lovely.
of story, essentially. And then the rules were sort of blended into that in quite an old school way, actually, which was, again, it stood out in a time where everything was becoming very streamlined and very slick and straightforward. It was mechanically, but the way it appeared, the way they had gone into great detail and to great lengths to bring this completely self-made universe to life was superb. Yeah, we'll throw some pictures up.
You have some pictures, yes.
Yeah, some pictures. We'll have a look at these.
So these are predominantly ships, aren't they?
What we're looking at here is we're looking at one of the alien factions known to humankind as the Scourge.
Okay.
And what we have here are a mixture of dropships, some kind of interceptor style vehicles. They look quite odd, as you can see. They're kind of very organic, covered in eyes. They're not really necessarily going to be crude, although I believe kind of fluff wise there is a kind of symbiote creature sat within. So all these vehicles, these dropships, they're all semi-living with this particular faction.
I see.
So what we do have, the little guys that are sat down on the bases and everything, these are your kind of infantry. We've got the little walker type creatures for the Scourge, which are their sort of tank units. So this is roughly what most of the factions kind of looked like. So because the game itself was based around, it was a really high movement game. The idea being that the force that you brought to this particular conflict was, it's more like a group of specialists. So looking at what I've got here, we might have 50 individuals maybe, and they're accompanying dropships.
Yeah.
The idea being that the Hunt's kind of combat style, there are no sort of trenches here. This is not dug-in warfare. This is a flashpoint, and those that need to secure it, destroy it, are heading towards it at great speed.
Yeah.
Very nippy little, often aerial troop transport for the most part.
Yeah.
You've also got the larger models here for the Scourge there. You've got some very heavy drop ships to drop they're more weighty, hardier ground assets and stuff like this. You're not really looking at individuals here, characters, although the model count doesn't have to be massive,
No.
because most of these forces, some more than others, are looked upon as quite elite. It actually, mechanically, the game is, or it certainly was at the time, was very superbly balanced. So it kind of lent itself very strongly to tournament play, of which I partook a few times. And they were blistering days, really, really good. Really, they were the most mentally punishing of any tournaments I went to. Thoroughly enjoyable, but they were hard work, because despite the game having reasonably, I would say, easy to learn rules, has a little bit of the sort of Go or chess about it. You will spend some time agonizing over a move because of the potential counter moves.
One move could make or break a game. So that thought process, and tournaments are like that, though, aren't they? They can be very grinding. I mean, the amount of times I've come away from a tournament having the most amazing time. Doesn't really matter the system. I've played in a few different tournaments with lots of different systems. You love in every moment of it, but you come away with the worst headache. You feel dehydrated and you feel tired, and but you've had such a good weekend.
I was advised by a comrade that I played with to get sort of tournament ready at the time.
Yeah.
Right. I was actually advised that, like, okay, when the day begins, about half an hour before you get to your first table, get your energy drinks, obviously. Take plenty of water with you, right, and prime yourself with a couple of paracetamol, and take them at 4-hour intervals through the day. And by the blood, that was incredible advice, right? Because I tried it without on the second day, which was kind of a half day of the first tournament I went to. And the second day was like hell, in a good way, but like hell. There might have been some booze before in the evening times, that's why I put my placement was very mid-table on that occasion, which was probably why. But no, the tournament scene for it was really, really strong. You could play it campaign-wise as well.
You could, good.
Yeah. There were rules to connect each kind of escalating engagement, and you could take a vast pool of resources and reserves, and you would then parcel them out as a scenario was rolled up. As an engagement became larger, it started with a couple of very small scout sorties, and then heavier units were slowly drafted in. But Drop Zone Commander for me was, it had a really interesting rule set, very, very unique miniature range and background story. It had a really healthy tournament scene. The armies were large enough that they looked the part. They looked like a sort of strike force, but they were not of a scale and a cost, like money-wise, and time cost to paint. They were of something that I could get on board with. So it was really it was the last sort of non-skirmish game that I ever played.
Wow. Okay.
But it still, to my mind, it kind of fits in the skirmish category, because, like I say, unless you're doing a really horde army, and even then, they're not massive horde armies in the game. It's still quite a small model count, and they're small models.
Yeah, as far as the flavor of the game goes, you're fighting big, epic battles here.
Yes. Yeah. You were fighting your table. You and your opponent were a small pocket in this very, very large invasion,
like a cross section of a huge wall. That's
exactly. Yeah.
Very nice.
So me and my dear brother, who I initially cracked open that first Drop Zone Commander kit with, it's like, shall we start playing some games again that don't last 2.5 hours? Because despite them being kind of skirmishy model count, there was a lot of there was a lot of tactical options and flexibility, and because it was quite balanced to be fairly competitive, it made games run on for a good long while. So eventually it was just like, I can't remember exactly what we moved on to. There was a short period of time where I played a little bit of Bushido directly afterwards.
Yeah, interesting.
Which is very, very small scale.
Yes.
Tiny board, very few miniatures, really, really cool. But yeah, I think basically after that kind of year and a half splurge, for me, that was a really contained and beautiful and quite hardcore hobby time.
Yeah, very good.
The miniatures are still with me. I plan to keep them, even though I can't really use them for anything
Make
else.
sure you keep
They look really pretty. Yeah. So I think for me it still ranks as one of my favourite gaming experiences, and I put most of it down to it just ticking all of the boxes at that time that I needed.
It does, doesn't it?
Something
It really
fresh.
does.
It was something unique, both in the way it played and the miniatures and the fluff. Everything about it was just fresh and beautiful and new and shiny.
And that's it, isn't it? It's a new experience, isn't it? Like when I find some new games, I can talk about, Rack and Confrontation, for example, or a War Machine created by Privateer Press. When those games hit the scene, and you've got this something so new and so unusual and so exciting and so rich in lore and story, it is quite an exciting experience. And they do stay with you. Yeah, they become part of you.
They do. They become part of you, just like taking that 2 paracetamol and a glass of water before any tournament, which I now advise everyone to do, and whatever tournament I'm playing in.
Tournament prep with Grumsworth.
Exactly. And also what I wouldn't advise is the evening before your first games, don't take an army that you need to bring fully painted. Don't take one unit unpainted and attempt to paint it in your travel lodge, because that, honestly, not ideal. But
I do that.
but they came out pretty good actually. But it was a fucking late night, and it was an early start. So
that didn't help. That didn't help proceedings, did it?
It didn't help it at all.
Grumsworth. It's fascinating, and it's amazing how 2 very different games can have so many of the same links and tie-ins to each other. My experience with More Time, yours with Drop Zone Commander. It's really nice, and I'm sure lots of our
fine listeners,
and viewers there, I'm sure they can regale us with many similar tales that they can wax lyrical about.
Yeah, I mean, we shall look forward to hearing them as well. If you have the stamina and the strength to compose us a fine email concerning if you're at one of those tournaments or played in one of those More Time groups or some such,
maybe you played alongside me and don't even realize it.
Exactly. Imagine that. We'll be right back, folks.
All right.
Welcome back, everyone, to the segment that we've laughingly named Where the Magic Happens, right?
Where the Magic Happens.
Yeah, this is where we're going to take a single magic card. You've seen us do it, or listened to us do it, or maybe you haven't done any of those things. But we're going to take a single Magic the Gathering card. We're going to have a look at its artwork. We're going to check it out mechanically, have a little dabble into its flavor text, a general little ramble about it. This magic card is always selected by one of our fine listener stroke viewers.
And this week's Magic the Gathering card comes in courtesy of Odd Job.
That's right, folks. Odd Job.
I wonder if it's the very same Odd Job from the 007 films.
I'm assuming it is.
Yes, let's just go with that. It is.
Okay.
So Odd Job has chosen actually, this is one of my. Well, I'd like to say one of my favorite cards. Okay. I've got lots of very favorite cards, but this one I have used. Lots.
Wow. Okay.
Lots and lots. It's seen play in many different decks that I've built, and it's also from my actual favorite set that Magic the Gathering has produced.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So this is quite dear to me. This one. So Odd Job. Well done already. You're already the winner.
So strong work, Oddie.
Yeah. This card is the Doomed Traveler.
It is.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's it's a white card from the Innistrad set. It was
Very
the
gothic horror, isn't it?
very gothic horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything about it was about fear, paranoia, terror,
Mm.
and ultimately doom and death and the inevitable end of things. So I love this, and often I would play a game around Halloween using lots of cards, as many cards as I could from the Innistrad block.
Perfect, right? Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So this guy is a creature. He's a human soldier.
He
Um,
is.
and I guess we could begin by looking at some of the artwork here.
Yes, let's.
Yeah.
This is courtesy of Lars Grant West, who has done a lovely job on this.
Mm.
So, I think a little bit of a ramble about the art direction for Innistrad. So, the guy that we got here, as it's noted, he is a human soldier, and he is dressed and equipped as are all of the human soldiers. So he's recognisably sort of tied in this particular block, this
Yeah.
world, this land of Innistrad. There,
Yeah.
so he looks like a regular kind of jobber. You know, he's got his halberd there, backpack on, little sort of nice little pillbox hat. He
Yeah.
actually looks kind of more modern, I would say, for the setting. He has the look of a sort of World War II Russian
He
infantryman.
does. It's the overcoat that
Do you
does it, I
think
think, and that
the
the big
grey
collar.
coat?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
big collar on
yeah,
there. He's obviously walking out of the little hamlet behind him,
yeah, yeah.
and he's not far away from his home, actually, is
The
he?
lights are still there. Yeah,
Um, the road goes ever on and on.
especially for him.
Now, I think I mentioned initially has to go to the lighting on this because you've got looks to me
Okay.
like
Yeah.
two areas of lighting going on here. One is the
Yes.
moon at the very back of the picture in the
Yep.
background there above
Behind the Hamlet. Yeah, yeah.
behind the little hamlet. And there's another piece of lighting coming in from off camera, so to speak, into the picture, which
Yes.
the traveller there, doomed as he is, looks on at it, and what it is isn't really described, but
Doesn't
his
need to be, does it?
no, it throws his shadow into completely different shape. However, almost as if he's resigning and raising, perhaps in that typical arms outstretched pose where the
I
spirit will
see
leave the
that.
body.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's at odds with the actual shape of the figure himself. So that's quite
Yes.
interesting.
It is, and I think it is the meat and bones of the theme that is being put across
Yeah.
with the artwork there. It is the case that this doomed traveler and his shadow, his spirit body or some such, they are two separate things,
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
and they are destined, doomed as he is, to be separated from one
To
another.
be split.
So
Mm.
to be split. So this for me is why the shadow version of him cast against the nearby rock by whatever light he is looking into is forming a totally different silhouette than he is.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he's staring at a bright white light because that's quite at odds with the
Yes.
idea of something that will come and snatch your soul away, isn't it? The idea of something light and bright like that is
Mm.
potentially, the light at the end of the tunnel, maybe the end of
Yeah, yeah,
things,
yeah,
but
yeah,
there is
yeah.
something about it that looks almost hopeful and positive.
Yes. Doomed as he is, though, it may well be a benevolent force. He was always destined to be separated from his spirit, his shadow. I mean, nothing about the picture actually looks very threatening.
No, it doesn't. But the idea of the whole thing will go onto the flavor text and the rules,
Mm.
etc. But the whole thing is about this guy dying. Yet everything about it seems almost a little hopeful.
Yeah, but I think that does work out in the mechanics and the flavor text as well,
Yeah.
because it does appear that this guy does have a life beyond his flesh one, doesn't he?
I mean,
Different.
he obviously he's got a life. He's got his hamlet. The surrounding forest, clearly dark and misty as it is, um, really throws the figure in the foreground into stark contrast, doesn't it, with the
Yeah,
background? He's
it
leaving
does.
that life of gloom behind him, almost as it is that misty, shrouded life, and
Hmm.
he's stepping out onto the road, onto that journey to embark upon whatever adventure he's going to go on. And that
Yes.
adventure will inevitably end. So it's almost as if it's a metaphor for the end of all of our days, isn't it?
It might well be. So let's have a little talk then about his mechanical actions within this game. He is a 1 white mana to summon him there. So cheap as you can possibly be. He's a 1/1 creature, a human soldier, so he benefits from those keywords.
Yeah.
And his mechanical text reads, when Doom Traveler dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield.
Yeah,
Which
and
I think
it's
really
strict.
thematically cool.
Yeah, that's right. And it's actually he becomes something better than he was,
Yes,
which
it's true.
adds
Yeah,
again to that idea of
yeah,
there being a lot
yeah,
of
you're right.
hope in this card and positivity as opposed to just death.
Mhm.
His creature type changes from human
It
soldier
does, yeah,
spirit, so potentially loses out on some of the benefits that being a human soldier may give him. But he
that's
does
true.
gain flying, which is it's quite a good ability in Magic. When you play with a card like this, as I've often done, you kind of want to put them in a situation where they do die. You want that Doom
Yes,
Traveler to meet his
you
end,
do.
usually
Yeah,
as
yeah,
swiftly
yeah.
as possible. The earlier
Yes.
you can get some flying creatures on the battlefield, the better.
You get out of that bloody Hamlet, boy.
You know,
You
get
get
out
down there
there,
to your death.
take your Doom so I can win.
Exactly.
It is, yeah. It's a really, really good card, and because he's so cheap, he is as a 1/1 for
Mm,
1 mana.
mm.
He's affectionately known as a white weenie.
He is. He's a weenie.
The white weenie, it's a
The
particular type of
tiniest.
build in Magic the Gathering where you use lots and lots of very cheap creatures. Usually they're of the white color, and you throw them out onto the battlefield as quickly as you can, and they all interact with each other and synergize to make each other stronger. So this card's often used in white and black because there are lots of cards out there that synergize enchantments that affect only creature tokens, for example,
Yeah.
cards that are
Okay.
enchantments that interact with spirits or creatures with flying. So you
Yeah.
can really get some interesting combinations in this. So he is one of my favorite cards game wise. And
Mm.
it's one of those cards that I really love that just tells a story, you know?
So, do you want to tell us the story with his flavor text there?
Yeah, okay. So the flavor text reads, he vowed he would never rest until he reached his destination. He doesn't know how right he was.
Mm. Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah.
And it's
Really
really
good.
really nice. Maybe just through the way we describe these cards, that
Mm.
they seem to be flavor
Yeah.
text that marries
Yeah.
in nicely with the rules, which marries in nicely with the art and in the
It
name
really
of the
has
card
here as
itself.
well, hasn't it?
And this is just another one of those perfect examples of a card that tells that tale. It works nicely, and it's the whole thing has been directed and put together neatly. And Lars Grant West, it is
Perfect
very
job.
cleverly done, I think. Actually, yeah, the combination of dark and light works really nice.
Yeah. Technically very beautiful as well.
Mm.
Painted in a very realistic style, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's like one of those cards that you could really get a real good close-up look and see lots of lovely detail. Great work, Lars.
Yeah. And thanks, Odd Job, for
Mm.
selecting that for us. I'm looking forward to the day when someone selects something that doesn't work for. The art is abstract and unusual. It doesn't really go with the mechanics or flavor. So maybe, when we come across one of those, you'll see us rubbing our hands together and thinking, how is this going to work out? Yeah.
What do you see in this? It's different to what I see in this.
So I think that wraps up our little magical adventure there, our
Yeah, then
exploration of a card. The magic has happened, and we're another card down to working through the entirety of them.
Grumsworth, I hate to say it, but it's that time again, mate.
Don't say it. This,
Oh,
have you heard a knock at the door?
I have.
I thought as much.
I have.
Does
And it's
it
old
does it
father
sound? It's old father time. Why?
He's back.
Why? He always comes complaining, telling us our time has elapsed. Very, very strange character, actually.
Well,
So sorry about that.
it's got to that point now. Again, if any of you guys want to let us know what you feel about what we're doing, how you're liking what we've done, any comments, any suggestions for a magic card, you'll see
Yeah,
beneath our faces here contact information and our social medias. Grumsworth,
that's right.
it's been an absolute pleasure again, hasn't it?
Oh, it's been a bloody joy, Burlokk.
Yeah.
Well, it really has. It really has. I think we've learned some things here.
I certainly have about Drop Zone Commander, and I want to play some now that you've mentioned it. So I think it's time you
Well, I
dusted
don't,
off your
I
fleet.
don't, I don't want to give you a game of it. So, no, of course I will. Yeah, we can do that. And maybe one day I'll take you up on your offer to play more time at the drop of a hat. So,
It will be as well. You drop that hat on there before it hits the floor.
Okay. Okay then, Burlokk. I assume you've prepared for us a quote.
I have, actually. I have.
You have.
Yes, it's a quote that I picked up on many, many years ago, and I've often wondered about it in the quiet hours of the night. From the original Warhammer, the mass combat fantasy role.
Look at that incredible cover art.
This is from 1983, in fact. So this was the first edition of Warhammer. It was by Richard Halliwell, Brian Ensel, and of course the famous Richard Priestley. Good old Rick.
Gets around, doesn't he?
Seminal work, if you ask me. There's a piece in here I would just like to share with you before we sign off for the final time today. It's a section in the book that discusses tabletop battles and how you should lay out your battlefield for the ideal game. There's a long paragraph here. I'll come in about halfway down. So,
okay.
Let me say now, goodbye all. Thank you for joining us.
I will add my goodbyes to yours, Burlokk. Join us next time. And without further ado, we'll go and say hello to Father Time, and Burlokk is going to read for us this beautiful wargaming parable.
Houses can be bought from hobby shops. Some are made especially for wargaming and look right in relation with the figures. Houses designed for railway enthusiasts tend to be a bit small, but this doesn't really matter. Of course, if you're really ambitious and a pretty good modeler, you can make your own out of card. This is a good idea, because then you can design pieces especially for your adventures. From peasant hovels to grandiose Gothic mansions with horrible gargoyles, Citadel makes some excellent little windows, pillars, and other architectural pieces, including a really ugly gargoyle. Hedges and trees must be bought, but are quite cheap and available from hobby stores. Lichen can also be bought from the same shop. This is a sort of moss-type stuff, which is used by railway modelers for scenery and eaten by reindeer in Sweden. Again, it's quite cheap. Good news for reindeer, and available in a variety of colours. It is superb for hedges and for decorating woods and marshes. You've been listening to The Preamble. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, and many other podcast platforms. And if you want to contact us, just send an email to thepreamble@gmail.com or find us at The Preamble on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Your hosts were Grumsworth and Burlokk, brought to you by roguesgaming.com. Special thanks to our contributors, our spotlight artist, and of course, to all of you. See you next time.